So this is part 2 of the BabyAngelGeronimo editions of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast on the internet. Not on satellite, not on and not on cable networks or cable platforms. Hopefully this edition would be of due length, and we shall hopefully update on some of the key issues that we are focusing on. The announcement by Grant Shapps. Grant Shapps is one of the conservatives. How shall I put it? I mean, the whole front bench of the conservatives during Boris Johnson as incumbent at number 10 Downing Street, the whole front bench was weird and incompetent, unfit for purpose. And most of the front bench that Theresa May fronted was likewise. But then so was the case with Cameron. Cameron had two elections. Cameron had one election in 2010, which was resolved by Nick Sick Clegg betraying the promises he made to the students about fees, tuition fees. And Sick Clegg will never live that down because he betrayed. And then he capitulated to Cameron or colluded to Cameron, or Cameron fronted cons. And thereby allowed the formation of the condemned collusion that lasted from May 2010 until the election of 2015. The 2015 election produced an increased number of conservative MPs fronted by Cameron. But Cameron totally fucked up because Cameron is the one who brought Brexit. Cameron didn't have to, but he did. And the Labour Party, whoever fronted the Labour Party, so-called in Parliament, totally failed on the narrative about Brexit. And the Labour Party is politically dead, as it is now. Despite the fact that today, Sunday, the 9th of October 2022, the mainstream British newspapers, especially the likes of The Guardian, are giving credit to Keir Starmer. But Keir Starmer doesn't deserve any credit because he hasn't done anything credible or credit-worthy. But as I said before, and as the events prove, the reason why there is the poll rating reversal apparently in favor of the Conservative Party, apparently in favor of the Conservative opponents, the Labour Party. That reversal is nothing whatsoever to do with Keir Starmer doing anything to create the reversal, to create the favorable psephological environment apparently for the Labour Party. All that is due to the fact that the Conservatives are dishonest, dysfunctional, etc., all the time, always. But on this occasion, they have become like if Cameron was, say, an arsehole, shithole to the point of 5 or something, then Lies Truss and crazy Kwarteng can be shown as representing a multiplied state, multiplied 100 times. They are completely, absolutely stupid. And because of that unprecedented evidence of incompetence and stupidity and idiocy, and lack of direction, and lack of honesty, etc., 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 the people, the center kind of so-called bloc, I'm not saying politically center, but the main numbers of people who will cast their votes and who do cast their votes and whose casting of the votes actually makes it possible to say that there has been an election. Most people don't boycott election. That's the point I'm making. So those people who are likely to cast their votes whenever an election is called, I mean, that is the kind of parameters used by the pollsters. If an election is called and those people are in a position to cast their votes, what would they do? And the answer is that they would vote in large numbers, they would vote for the opposition. Not because it is fronted by Keir Starmer, but because the opposition is the only hope the people have of having a kind of government. I mean, the line today in one of the papers or one online that crazy Kwarteng having announced the very first thing he announced, and he put it through the rumor mill. The very first thing he announced after he was announced as being the finance minister, so-called, was that he was going to make the bankers very happy indeed, even much more happy and much more richer than they ever had been. Crazy Kwarteng will never, ever live this down. So what does he do? He makes it even worse. He then goes and has a celebratory drink with the bankers. What was his game? His game was that because he bribed them to such an extent that they will never be able to claim poverty or hardship in the rest of their biological lives, they would pay him back. That's what he expected. As a crazy Kwarteng. And what happened? This has backfired because it has now been reported that at least a number of people have already asked the quote civil servants to set in motion the process whereby crazy Kwarteng's drinks with the bankers in the context of his bribery announcement that he was going to remove the limits on bankers' bonuses, that the civil servant should set in motion an investigation as to what rules crazy Kwarteng broke. He did break rules, but the investigation should uncover the details. Now, Kwarteng has been promoted, as I have said, I mean, in the immediate aftermath of the nightmare that he and Truss got engulfed in by their own idiocies. Kwarteng was being given a mitigation in propaganda by being mentioned that he had attended the University of Harvard and that he had done a PhD on the history of economics. And that was at the University of Cambridge. And that he had attended Eton College. Now, put all of those together, and none of them, individually or collectively, can be treated as genuinely black in the sense implied by Rupa Haque, the 49-year-old daughter of a Hindu mother and a Bengali father, who is a member of parliament carrying the so-called Labour Party banner. And she said, anyone listens to Quartang on the BBC Radio Today program or similar, then he does not come across as genuinely black. She said that he comes across as superficially black. Now, of course, Rupa Haque is an idiot. She doesn't know about the media, and she doesn't know about the sociology of the media. And she most certainly doesn't know about the BBC's real agenda. For a start, most people who appear on the BBC, on any platform, the BBC has got hundreds of local and central kind of platforms. The BBC has got, by definition, because of the demography, space and time for people who never went to Eton College or Cambridge or Harvard. By definition, these people are members of the demography, the population. And most of the mundane issues of the day that they are asked to comment on or speak about have nothing to do with these kind of what Rupa Haque must think, elite symbols, etc., of background, etc. Even if a non-Eton, non-Harvard, non-Cambridge attending black-skinned individual appeared on the BBC anywhere and spoke in an accent that was not representative of the ordinary demographic in the country, that could not be used to say that that person was not representative of black people or was not genuinely black people or whatever, black member of the black community. Rupa Haque missed the point that regardless of the background, the person appearing on any platform, public platform, BBC, ITV, Sky News, Channel 4, whatever, had to be tested. The main test of their acceptability or relevance was their policy, their thought that went straight into the lives of people, the majority, overwhelming majority of the people affected by their given policy. That's what she should have said. The fact that she didn't say that is not an accident, as I have said in various ways. Rupa Haque is the sister of Connie Haque. Now, there are apparently, according to the reports so far, there are 3 sisters. The other one has not been reported, at least in this context so far, but is described as an architect. So the other sister is an architect. Rupa Haque is a member of parliament, and she holds a PhD from the University of East London. The University of East London used to be the North East London Polytechnic, where 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, I got publicly elected to edit the newspaper. I was the publications editor, and I was elected by the body of the students 44 years ago, I think. And And the publication that I did was called Northeast Polytechnic Activists Monitor. It wasn't the name that I gave because it was given, the name was given by somebody, an Australian, I think. An Australian who was the first editor of that publication. A man called Greer, I think. And then I stood at the election and I heavily defeated a thing called Jerry Udall. Jerry Udall was really an idiot. He did not understand the issues that students across the country were facing. And I was very heavily involved in the campaign against the racist policies on education, especially the imposition of the overseas fees, restricting the access to UK institutions by African and Asian students. But that was not the only issue. I fought also for the women cleaners. The women cleaners based in Plasto, which is in Newham. Women cleaners were fighting for better conditions and better recognition by the polytechnic authorities. So I supported them, and my support made a difference, etc., etc. And I was already publishing a weekly bulletin, 2-page weekly bulletin called Feedback. Feedback was unprecedented for a department to have as a student outlet. It was highly scholastic and highly up to date on an international level. And I reported exclusively on the then recently completed travel of China by a China friend or China phobe, like a Sinophobe. Was it phobe? No. It's a China friendly person. What do you call him? His name was Felix Green. So Felix Green gave a very highly powerful propaganda piece about China. Remember, that was 1976. And the heading that I gave to the transcript of this speech that I reported, not just the transcript, I also reported the rest of it. And the headline I gave is very memorable. And that was Green Paints Red China. Now, Felix Green was a spelling with the green with an E, and of course, red China is without any extras. So it was very up to date and very exclusive and all the rest of it. On the strength of all those things, I got elected by a very huge majority. Now, that was not an election to parliament, but it could have been. I didn't stand for parliament, but I could have stood many times in the last 46, 44 years. The point is that if I went to parliament, in the UK parliament, what would I be doing? Because whenever there is this ritual, Prime Minister's questions or PMQs, ordinary people don't hear it from home or outside, but in the chamber, whenever the sitting Prime Minister of the day is on their feet, the opposition makes such noisy interruptions that anyone of any self-respect would be compelled to give up, because it would not be worth suffering that kind of idiotic interruptions. My reason really has always been, like in deciding not to learn how to drive, I decided not to become a driver and join the completely uncivilized cacophony of other drivers that are very intolerant of each other. That is the reason. So I didn't become an MP because there wouldn't be anyone else to share the frustrations with, and that would be a completely, absolutely disastrous waste of my time. Just be on the record as a member of parliament is not good enough. Just be a member of the cabinet of this, that, and the other is not good enough at all. I have to be able to tell the truth and make a mark of telling the truth, which is why I refused several invitations to join the cabinet or join the government or join the regime in what was Pakistan, then East Pakistan, then Bangladesh. The reason I left Bangladesh was nothing to do with anything to do with my political role, because my political role had never been aligned with anyone else's. Nobody. The reason I left Bangladesh was because it became completely unbearably stupid. Nobody there, apart from Maulana Abdul Hamid Khan Bashani and his very small group of supporters, there was no real political discussion in the country. You couldn't discuss anything that was happening, and it was absolute disaster every single day. So Cucumber Murshid said to somebody that I knew at the time, "Do you know what he did? What the fuck did Kumar Murshid know? Murshid is a shit. He didn't know nothing." I played at a level that was higher than any that was accorded to any cabinet minister or the minister of the day, prime minister of the day of the East Pakistan governor of the day, if you like. I got the highest treatment on national news. I was given the priority. Where was the fucking Kumar Murshid? He had not heard of these things, nor his family. So for a Murshid, an illegal entrant to the UK, to say that, did you know what he did? How dare the boy, Murshid? So when the cabinet of Lies Truss has people like Crazy Kuatang and Kemi, Bad Enoch. Can you imagine? Put those two words together, Bad Enoch. What kind of name is it? I mean, it could not be more ridiculous. Bad Enoch. Does she know the irony of that name? Kemi Bad Enoch, and then this Goan, Suela Cruella Fernandez, now braver man. Braver man. She's not a man, but she's a braver man. She says, of all things, she has to be that stupid. She says that too many Indians are coming to the UK and there should be a limit to the numbers of Indians coming or being allowed to enter the UK on student visas, etc., etc. Now, what Lies Truss is doing is kind of fulfilling a dream that Boris the Liar Johnson had. The Boris Johnson dream, a fantasy, was that he was going to recreate the empire. Because that was one of the things that he promised to people, the brainwashed little Englanders that they misinformed and hoodwinked in the name of Brexit. He said that after Britain becomes independent of the European Union, independence is the point that they were making, it would create a worldwide business empire. That was effectively what they were promising. And the worldwide business empire enterprise included the whole of India, the entirety of Australia and New Zealand, Canada, and some such places. Now, any common sense people, any person with common sense would know that you cannot do that. European Union membership initially started with as the European Economic Union. It was an economic association, of course. But the economics was very much proximate. I mean, this is in the proximity, in the here, in the near, in the neighborhood. Logistically, transport wise, and time wise, and temperature wise, the British economy depends on the rest of Europe. Britain is part of Europe. Anyone who says that Britain is not part of Europe, how do you condemn their idiocy at every level? Britain is part of Europe geographically, temperamentally, traditionally, historically, faith wise, all the other things. So the European Union was a natural progression. Okay, there were imperfections in the process and in the practices. And that is why politicians are supposed to address the imperfections. The fact that they didn't is not the fault of the union itself. It's the fault of the politicians like the crooks like nasty Nigel Farage. Farage was, throughout his whole entire period of his membership, as a member of the European Union, nasty Nigel Farage was busy screwing women of all European backgrounds and fiddling various kinds of excuses he was using and stealing money under allowances. Why do I say the screwing women? Because that's the essence of this liar. He was saying that he hated Europe, meaning all these other nationalities, and yet he couldn't keep himself away from those women coming from those countries. That is the contradiction. That is the stupidity. And that is the absolute dishonesty and corruption and criminality. So Farage was a thief. When the Brexit so-called referendum took place, Farage had against him, outstanding against him, at least a dozen investigations and inquiries concerning his theft and fraudulent stealing of money from various parts of the European Union funds. Well, Farage was not the only thief. Neil Kinnock was a thief as well, as was Mandy Mandelson. These two Labour commissioners were big-time thieves, and they really did discredit the European Union, because all the audited accounts of the European Union and various inquiries showed them to be involved in stealing money and corruption and lack of accountability. They were not as busy with holding decision makers to account as they should have been. They never were. Again, that is not the fault of the union. The union had all the kind of principles in place. It was the practice that was missing. And the reason why the practice was missing was the British commissioners of the European Union were all thieves and crooks. And those thieves and crooks discredited the European Union in the field of propaganda, because the incidents of theft and corruption by the likes of Neil Kinnock, when those were reported either informally among the cognoscenti or publicly in the newspapers, the news media, Those made bad headings and bad reading, and the case for continuing European Union was to that extent undermined every time that happened. In the run up to the referendum of June 2016, the Labour Party completely was dead. Remember who the Labour Party leader was? Of course, the liar, Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn was a fan of the liar Tony Benn. And Tony Benn and Enoch Powell, both dead, were two of the most assiduous opponents of the European Union. They really didn't have the reason. They had emotion that could drive quite a few people in Little England against the European Union, but they didn't have substance. For example, this thing that happened in the last, let's say, 2 weeks. The Bank of England took emergency action and it risked 65 billion pounds current prices in order to avert a disaster. And the disaster would have been if the Bank of England had not made that credit available to the economy generally. The economy, in order to function, would have had to borrow and steal money from the various pension funds. Those were the reserves kept by various pensions, various big outlets and organizations. And the pensioners would have been absolutely, the pensioners affected, not all the pensioners would have been affected, but enough pension funds money would have had to be stolen to put at risk so many people that could not be rehabilitated financially. And there would be real chaos. And there would be chaos not because the participants in any riots or disturbances would have been politically motivated ideologically. They would be motivated by the pangs in their stomach. Literally, there would have been starvation in this country on the part of many people, not the ones that Kwarteng had the drinks with and was in making even richer than they were before. So this is the reality that the Bank of England realized and acted on it quite timely. Prompt action. It didn't save not only the British economy as such, it also saved Lies Truss and Kwarteng, both of whom had been until very recently openly critical of the Bank of England. Fuck them. As for Tony Benn and Enoch Powell, I didn't visit any place that Enoch Powell visited, but I did attend events across England where Tony Benn addressed public events in the 1970s. Because 1970s is the decade that Tony Benn was last active in. He then petered out, he then faded. In the 80s and 90s, he disappeared. And Tony Benn, on the record, and I'm saying this, I'm not saying it for the first time, but I've said it before. I'm the one who is exclusively saying it. Tony Benn was probably the most accomplished liar on the whole of the British left, so-called. And he brainwashed the likes of Jeremy Corbyn, who is sub-educated and sub-informed, and other morons. And because of that, Jeremy Corbyn intentionally stayed silent about Brexit because he wanted Brexit, while the official stance of the Labour Party was that it wasn't taking that stance that it was against the UK leaving the European Union. Most Labour Party supporters with sensible minds could see that Brexit was a disaster. And so therefore this kind of 4-point difference was a kind of fabricated difference. A lot of lies were told, including Brenda, also known as the Queen Elizabeth II, playing strategic parts in spreading hints that suggested that Brexit was necessary or was a good thing for England. Because after all, Brenda was an England queen. She wasn't the queen of the world. She was an English queen. And so therefore, Corbyn did not oppose Brexit. And as he didn't oppose Brexit, he didn't articulate the consequences of Brexit. And as he didn't do that, he didn't highlight to the many people that were in the middle, waivers, that Johnson was lying about the 350 million or 350,000, whatever it was on the bus, that UK apparently paid to the EU every week or something. I mean, I'll check the actual bus and the writing and then update accordingly. Corbyn was not engaged. But generally, looking at Corbyn and observing him as I have done for the last 40 years or so, since 1982, yes, where at Altabali Park he praised me because I was the speaker before him at a public rally. And he said exactly as Ken Livingstone had said in Wandsworth in 1977 after a meeting where I and he addressed the same meeting. This is the exact words that Lying Still Livingstone said in 77 and Corbyn the moron said in 1982. I wish I could speak like you. Now these people are very limited in their horizon. They think that speaking like me, whatever they meant, was an asset that could get careers and get good applause, plaudits, and make them rich or make them famous, whatever. For me, speaking is nothing to do with that. For me, speaking is telling the truth at the moment, on the topic, on the subject. That is the biggest purpose of my speaking. I have always been motivated by telling the truth, nothing else. And in the process, to others, I have let so many opportunities pass by. I have not. To them, I have left so many opportunities, becoming a member, becoming rich, becoming this, that, and the other. I have not. As long as I have been able to tell the truth, that is what has mattered. That is what matters. So Corbyn didn't tell the truth about the implications of Brexit. Corbyn didn't. Otherwise, the difference of the 4 points would have been reversed, if you like. If that would have been the tight kind of difference, then it would have been 52% against leaving the European Union and 48% for leaving the European Union. Now, since the 2019 so-called election, the biggest excuse that the Brexiteering liars were given was by COVID, because that was the diversion. So the COVID emergency created the biggest possible diversion for the to avoid having to answer the questions that would have otherwise been foremost in the minds of people affected by the various impacts of the Brexit limitations, restrictions, etc., etc. The debate between those who agree with Suella Cruella and those who want more migrants or more Indians and more immigrants into this country is one of the of Brexit. Because Little Englanders, the majority of the Little Englanders, majority of the unschooled, uneducated, kind of, how shall I say, unsocialized Little Englanders are lazy. This is not something that I'm saying. This is what Lies Truss herself said. And this is what is admitted by most people who know the actual reality, either from their own experience as owners of companies or organizations, or as observers like politicians like Liz Truss and others. I know for a fact that over the last nearly 50 years, I have tried at various times, not always, not constantly, but at various times, to find locally kind of grown and locally brought up individuals doing short term kind of contracts. And I cannot find them. Whereas in the streets and on the kind of estates, the gangs of criminals making noisy presence of their presence known to the estate residents is absolutely undeniably present there, true. But these criminals don't go and they don't want to work, not at all. So you extrapolate this attitude and cover all of Little England, and you'd find that the people who actually do the picking of the fruits and whatever are not from Little England. These are people from other countries in the continent. I mean, this is not a one off thing. The decline of the so called British economy has been going on in the mental decline of the criminals who think that they are still emperors of the world. They don't want to work. And work is not a sin. Work is essential, absolutely vital for human kind of being, human life, them living. You have to have the purpose. And that purpose is absent from the Little Englanders. You look at the months of lying by Boris Johnson about the various COVID rules that he broke. You look at the lies. You look at the lies that he perpetrated and the lies that his so-called supporters perpetrated for him. And you can see a pattern. These are people whose mindset is so backward and so dark and so full of wrong that a new Jonathan Swift has to be invented to write a new Lilliputian Brobdingnag and all these tales, Gulliver's Travels. These are the Lilliputians and these are the tales of the Gulliver's account, if you like. How do you explain the line that Boris Johnson can actually read the Greek in its original? I mean, reading the Greek in its original or the other languages in their original forms. This is not an act of genius. All the languages of the world, all the active, live language on the planet Earth have 95% of the factors, aspects common between them, among them. Maybe some local kind of vocabularies or vocabulary kind of variations may distinguish some languages from the others. But universally, the values and the meanings of words are very common among all the languages, all the thousands of languages in the world. And that includes Greek, of course, in the original. There is nothing mysterious about the original Greek, except, as I said, the kind of temporal, periodic, or local kind of vocabulary elements. But the vocabulary is not the language. The vocabulary is only a part of the language. And if there is a kind of word or a phrase that is missing because of the vocabulary differences, then it can be substantiated or replaced by translation and interpretation. So when they promoted Boris Johnson as the person, they were suggesting that because he could read the original Greek or Greek in the original, therefore that implied that he was intelligent and that he was above average intelligence. Now that is not the case. How? Because we have seen that every time he lied, Johnson came up unstuck. And this went on for months. And every time he lied about how many women he slept with while he was married and so on, he came unstuck. He lied about Petronella Wyatt. First, when he coerced her into having the abortion, and then he lied about having the affair with her at all. And Petronella Wyatt did her best. She shouldn't have, but she did her best to protect him and keep the secret about their affair. It was Petronella's mother, coming from a European country, who detected the truth from Petronella's various contradictory behavior. And she exposed the liar Johnson. Until then, Johnson was lying and denying the affair. And he did the same thing with the first wife that he married. When he began sleeping with Marina Wheeler, who is the woman who has produced the largest number of children with him on the record. Because the other women he has had children with are not known. I mean, any number similar to Marina Wheeler. So Marina Wheeler knew that while she was still married to the congenital fucker, he must have been sleeping with so many other women. She didn't know. And she must have resolved. When she got ill with cancer, she knew that she couldn't rely on his help in consoling her in the fight that she had to fight. So this criminal is openly, brazenly a criminal. And he's such a criminal role model. He can only be a role model for gangsters and crooks and thieves. What is the point of having access to the Greek original language in Greece? So many thieves in Greece could read the Greek language in the original. So many criminals in England can read English in its original. What the fuck? So we have got a culture that is in serious decline because the culture is dominated by crooks and liars and thieves and deniers. The biggest philosopher on the left, as promoted, was Tony Benn, of course. And he was a liar and a thief. He stole quite generously from other writers and thinkers. And of course, Enoch Powell was the worst immigration and all the rest of it because he was the minister. We're talking about the same thing, shortage of little Englanders prepared to work or skilled enough to work. That was the case with Enoch Powell. People forget. Whenever they talk about Enoch Powell and racism and all the rest of it, they really forget that this liar should be held accountable not because of racism or morality, because he would not be amenable to moral accountability. But he was a liar because the whole economy in the so-called post-war Britain was in peril because people weren't there to work. So the people of the Caribbean islands, especially the people that are represented in the Windrush name, were essential for the economy, not for the political party, this, that, and the other, but for the economy, for the whole country, the population. This was helped by those people and others from Africa and Asia that people came. So it was the starvation of the ordinary people that the people of the kind of Windrush saved. People were saved from starvation by the people from the Caribbean. It was not a pathetic kind of part-time job. It was the whole country depended on the very hard work, loyal work, diligent work by these people who saved the country. The racists on the left, on the like the Guardian and the SWB wonkers, including Paul Foot, the moron, they said that the migrants, they said when they were talking about Powell, that the people, the immigrants, were brought here to help the rich people, etc., etc., the factories, etc. That is not true. The immigrants who came from Africa and Asia and the Caribbean, of course, saved the British, a whole British economy, not just one part, not just one area. And that has to be the debt that has to be paid. Not about reparation that Barney Grant wanted the reparation for slavery. Forget about slavery. The actual reparation for the African people, the Caribbean people, the Asian people, saving Britain here and now in the last 70 years, let's say, 80 years. Now, look at the National Health Service. There are all these so health facilities, whatever. Go anywhere in the within the NHS. What do you see? How many white faces do you see? Behind the counter, the chemists, or in the wards in the hospitals? It's overwhelmingly African origin women, Asian origin mixed men and women that you see. So these are not kind of 5% or 3% or 2%. These are the entire NHS physically, manually is being kept afloat, going by the people of African origin, people of Asian origin and backgrounds. And you go to the kind of secondary kind of sector, which is the care sector. And what do you see? Quite apart from the fact that many of the care business is owned and initiated by the people with the initiative, African people, Asian people. The main personnel are African and Asian. How did that happen? Where did the English disappear? Where did they go? And when they see an able-bodied architect like Chris Kaba, the Metropolitan Police, without hesitation, murders them. What kind of gratitude is that? Most of the people who work in the NHS or in the care services, so called, or in the allied industries that produce the various medicine, whatever, are not English people. Come on. They're not English people, most of them. So my question is, where are the English people? Where have they gone? It hasn't happened overnight. And this has to be the biggest revolutionary inquiry. Find the English people that have gone missing from England. So when the day Sunday Telegraph today, Sunday the 9th of October, 2022, on the front page says that Truss is saying, unite or face disaster. What does she know about disaster? She's an epitome, she's a personality personification of disaster. In any case, disaster has been there. And there will be no unity. Because the Conservative Party, contrary to the image that they present, and the media aids them in presenting the image, falsified image, the Conservative Party has never been truthfully united, because there has been never been a Conservative Party affiliation and membership based on ethics or morality or the love of the country, so called. The Conservative Party has always been about selfishness of the individual conservative, self-interest and selfishness, which is why they cannot see beyond their backsides, because all these people disappearing. Look at the schools, look at the colleges and whatever. You go to any institution, the schooling institution, let's say, what do they teach there? Do they teach them really the lessons? Do they teach them the teachings of the great Englishmen? Who are the great Englishmen? There was no great Englishman when, what is this man? The pain was revolting. I mean, he was the only one out of millions. And when Guy Fawkes kind of attempted 400 years ago to demolish the House of Parliament, how many Englishmen were bothered about the country that was being betrayed by the Parliament? How many? Who were the Englishmen that actually matched the care and the concern of Guy Fawkes? You cannot name anyone. Not a single one. So when Nazi Germany kind of nearly took over the United Kingdom, I mean, what did actually Churchill actually represent? What was he doing? What real compassion, dedication, and concern for his fellow Englishmen did Churchill actually have before Nazi Germany taking over the English islands, British Islands, became a reality? Look at the history, look at the records. When Churchill told his daughter-in-law, that is the wife of his son, I think, the American wife of his son. Churchill said to the American wife of his son, Randolph, to sleep with as many American diplomats as possible so that she could get the secrets of their plans and their thoughts about the war caused by Germany. Churchill is on the record and it is admitted. I mean, where is the morality? Churchill told his own son's own wife. Openly, he pimped his son's wife. He became the pimp, and she was to act as his pimp's asset, as a prostitute. What morality? So when they said that Churchill was the biggest whatever, what act did he perform that made him the biggest whatever? That is why there is no role model. There is no really moral or ethical role model before the Little Englanders. The only role model is like so nasty Nigel Farage. And he led or misled them. And all the other creeps that were shouting for Brexit have gone quiet. All of them. And Johnson, of course, never had any principle at all, because he even wrote the two opposite contradictory versions of the speech. In the case that the Conservative election produced support for the UK remaining. If that was the case, then he would give the Remainers speech. In the event, he did the Leavers speech. So he didn't belong anywhere morally. When Ian Duncan Smith, Dracula Duncan Smith, was in post as the Secretary of State for the Department of Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation, DWP. He was there, put there by the evil Cameron. When he was there, his purpose was to attack the poorest in society, the weakest in society, the most sick and the vulnerable. So much so that during his so called watch, any number of people committed suicide. Let's see what the statistics show or the reports show. Let's see what they're saying. So here is one report that is on the website Disability Rights UK. And the heading to this item dated 27th of February 2020 says, DWP destroyed reports into claimants who committed suicide after their benefits were stopped. The DWP has been accused of a cover up after destroying reports into suicides linked to benefits being stopped, reports independent.co.uk. So we'll go to the Independent shortly. So this is the kind of sample. A National Audit Office report published this month, that is February 2020, concluded that it is highly unlikely that the 69 claimant deaths the DWP has investigated represent the number of cases it could have investigated in the past 6 years, as the department does not have a robust record of all contact from coroners. Prior to 2016, when the department established the coroner focal point, there was no single clear route for coroners to contact the department. The National Audit Office also highlighted that here was no systematic tracking or monitoring of the lessons that emerge from the reviews. As a result, the department does not know what the suggested improvements are, whether the suggested improvements are implemented. This week, Debbie Abrams MP fought back tears in the Commons as she read out a list of 24 people who died after problems with their benefits. On the 69 DWP review since 2015, she told ministers, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We do not even know the actual number of people who have taken their own life as a result of what they went through. Ken Butler, DRUK's welfare rights and policy advisor, said Linda Cooksey and the family of other deceased claimants have been fighting for years for copies of the DWP review into their deaths to be sent to them. There should send to them. There is some kind of missing text there. So let's go and check if the details are better reported or accessible in the piece that the Independent website according to the disability report has. Well, this is another website that is not the independent, but let's see this one. This one is called the rethink.org. So it's a DWP's failure to investigate death and serious harm. Text going to come. Okay, so we are just numbers to them. That's a quote from a person. And it said the DWP's failure to investigate death and serious harm. So let's see where we can find the main text of this piece. So this is a piece that is in a different format. So let's see what it says. That particular one. So what I'm trying to establish here is a link between what the British Army General Dyer did in Amritsar and about 103 years ago, 4 years ago, Amritsar in the Punjab that is now in India, not the Punjab in Pakistan. The Punjab in Pakistan is the greater part of Punjab, but the Punjab in India is the Punjab where the Amritsar massacre by Dyer took place. I'm going to say what I mean by that connection, I mean. So these are case stories in this piece, yeah. And there is a case of an individual looks like an Asian, could be an African young man who's quoted as saying, "I nearly died because of this." Chris was wrongly accused of fraud in 2019, which led to his mental health crisis. The DWP were made aware, but it's unknown if an IPR was conducted into his case. The situation took a huge toll on Chris's mental health. I'd got to the point where I was getting suicidal. My parents had sent a letter, my psychiatrist had sent a letter to the DWP to say, you need to sort this out because he is very unwell and he could cause a death. But there was no response. A month later, Chris still wasn't receiving any benefits and had not been given an update on the fraud investigation. He was having to use what little savings he had to survive. Eventually, after making more phone calls to the DWP, they told him that someone with his name and date of birth had 30,000 in a post office account. I said I'd never had an account with the post office and I wouldn't be claiming benefits if I had 30,000. Chris was told he needed to prove that the post office account wasn't his, but it took many more difficult phone calls to eventually achieve this and get his benefits reinstated. Chris put in a formal complaint. I said, the first thing I want is an apology. No one apologized to me throughout this whole process. He was offered 70 pounds in compensation. I almost said to them, "You can have it back." That's an insult. I nearly died because of this. That is where this quotation comes from. The whole experience had a lasting impact on Chris's mental health. It made me feel worthless. I was treated like a criminal. It made my anxiety and paranoia so much worse. I couldn't leave the house. I'd made so much progress before this, and it's taken a huge amount of work to get back to where I am now. Now, this is an example of Chris, who might or might not be born in Britain. But the majority of the people who were forced to commit suicide are British born and white people. Now, who caused their suicide? Other white people in the DWP. Now, as part of the empirical evidence investigations that I have been conducting on various aspects of the DWP, and before it became DWP, the DSS and DHSS and all the other things, and into the employment department, into the NHS and the police and so on, I can confirm that, with exceptions like 1 or 2% of the white people that are given human rights compliant, if you like, recognition by employees or officials making decisions affecting their life and death rights, white people are treated as absolute rubbish by other white people who are in the position of making decisions. So white people are treated as trash. It is not other black people or black people, Asian people, or African people who treat white people in poverty or in difficult health situations with contempt. And if you look at the records of the words spoken by the various county court judges, magistrate court judges, or other judges in the high court and whatever, about white people involved in litigation concerning wrongdoings by the officials, you will find that these judges have nothing but contempt for these claimants, most of them. So you go back to the Channel 4 series in 2014, let's say, but they were talking about Benefit Street and they were depicting, well, some of the people depicted were, of course, of African Caribbean background. Others were of Asian, but a very small number were Asian. But the vast majority of the people in these benefit streets were really poor white people. Now, how did Channel 4, the program makers, treat these people as equal humans, worthy of respect? Most certainly not. Did they hear the kind of A to Z of how these people became locked and trapped in such prolonged poverty and lack of income and hardship? Because if they had listened to these, they would find the role played by the local council, the role played by the local councillors, the role played by other people locally, supposedly representative of these people, including the role played by the MPs not hearing the cases at all. And most importantly of all, when any of the claims went to the court, local court, the magistrates show nothing but contempt to the white poor people. And who are the magistrates? Who actually makes any assessment of the where the magistrates behave. You look at the contents, if they allow the contents to be accessible to the people for examination, you'd find that they are full of contemptuous words and expressions. And the article that Politonby in the Guardian, the article is there. I'm going to get access to this article because it's accessible online. She wrote a piece. Politonby, remember, is the woman that, although initially she didn't have a kind of conventionally successful career as a journalist, by the time she arrived at the Guardian, she established herself as a columnist to the point that what she said was quoted by many people, including the likes of David Cameron when he was being kind of inducted into the leadership position of the Conservative Party. And Politonby reciprocated by comments to Cameron and praising him, and thus giving him the kind of approval that helped him in propaganda terms. So Politonby has played the role of a kind of approver and certifier at the highest possible level in terms of career politics. So she is not somebody that just wrote a piece in the Guardian about the court. And the court I'm talking about is the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. It's a combined court. Shoreditch County Court was abolished and it was made a part of the Clerkenwell Court. Now, for empirical reasons, I have been studying the Clerkenwell Court both in person as well as on the basis of correspondence, etc., for many years. Now, I know Clerkenwell County Court as one of the pits of the corruption machine that produces regular homelessness, regular evictions, and regular joblessness for any number of people in London. So when I read this article by Politonby, I wanted to know just how stupid and ignorant she was. And Politonby comes across as being stupid and ignorant. I'll come to that evidence as soon as I locate this piece by Politonby. I'm absolutely certain it's there. It's there in the Guardian, on the Guardian website. Have I got the right entry? Yes. A day in court showed me the misery of Britain's housing policy. Now, this is a piece that appeared or is dated about 4 months before the referendum. So, this is the headline. A day in court showed me the misery of Britain's housing policy. That's dated the 2nd of February 2016. And it's Politonby now. And this is absolutely, totally, undeniably stupid. It's dated the 2nd of February 2016 and timed at 0600 hours GMT on that date. And the subheading is the bedroom tax. Hello? Hold on a second. Hold on. So there is this is a microphone on, so don't say
Okay.
anything. Just put the thing there. And I'll come to you after 10 o'clock. Okay, so I'll update you on the day's events. Thank you. Okay. So Polyton B has got this piece, and it says in the subheading, the bedroom tax and government cuts have led to a wave of evictions targeting the poor and vulnerable. And there is a picture of a building which is supposed to be a typical council building. It says, in the caption, it says, the housing crisis they inherited has worsened as rents rise, but David Cameron and George Osborne's cuts to social housing are a bizarre response. A housing estate in Tower Hamlets, photograph done, Kitwood, Getty Images. Now, I don't recognize that picture as it is printed. It may be part of the building, but they say it's Tower Hamlets, so I accept that it's the Tower Hamlets area. Now, the waiting room is packed, but with not enough seats. Some defendants hunker down. This is possession and eviction day at Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. Everyone here is in danger of losing their home. I'm reading straight from the piece, byline to Politoanby in that piece on that date, 2nd of February 2016. Now, the problem with The Guardian is that it then goes to immediately, unconditionally promote the organization called Shelter. And then it promotes the judge. And then it promotes the solicitor. All of these are responsible for doing the wrong things. And it doesn't talk about the council, local council, either in Tower Hamlets or anywhere else. And she doesn't mention any particular borough. So let's read the paragraph next, which is that the duty solicitor from Shelter gets just a few minutes to collect each person's details before presenting their case to the judge to stop an eviction for rent arrears. That's not long to extract difficult life stories from nervous people. He checks with the usher and smiles with relief. Today it's the nice judge. So she's admitting that every day is not a nice judge. Most judges are not nice, they're nasty. Every 90 seconds last year, a renter faced legal proceedings and 99,000 ended up evicted, mainly due to rising rents and housing benefit cuts. Enfield tops the list, but Peterborough and Rochdale are high too. First up is a 63-year-old man who creeps into the consulting room to perch anxiously on a chair. He brings such an air of despair. He seems enveloped in a grey fog of depression. He has 2,773 £37 of rent arrears for his two-bed flat. How did that happen? He sighs. His mother and sister died in the last flat last year. He hasn't worked for 5 years since an accident at work and now suffers mental problems. Bereavement, he says. I've never claimed anything until now, he adds, as if that were a defense. So, how has he survived? Friends helped out, selling stuff, odds and ends. Finally, he has prodded by others to claim his 73 pounds, 10-point job seekers allowance, and he may get disability pay. I think I'm waiting for a letter from the mental health team, he says. What tipped him over the edge financially was the bedroom tax, another 14% on his rent for the spare room after the family deaths. Now he has a notice to quit. The judge notes this man's mental state, agrees there is a small technical mistake in the landlord's application, and grants a 28-day adjournment to give shelter time to try to sort out his affairs. If not, he will be out. Next comes a grandmother who cares full time for her 10-year-old grandson and has fallen 3,948 pounds into arrears. She works in Tower Hamlets Council's kitchen, but it's 0 hours with unpredictable income, so sometimes she hasn't paid the rent. Next, the mother of a 2-year-old has arrears after she lost all her housing benefit because the Department of Work and Pensions think she is a student, but she isn't. She works in customer services. If she loses her home, the council will have to put them up in a bed and breakfast, costing far more. A self-employed man in arrears has been paying for his breakdown truck to get business going on his own, but his income is unpredictable. He has never thought to claim housing benefit. A mother has debts after her daughter moved out and she has to pay the bedroom tax. Rent takes up 60% of her income. Only one case looks simple: a young single man who refuses to pay rent after a long running dispute with his landlord over a wet carpet. Last, a woman comes in walking crookedly and sits rocking violently, trying to explain her mental problems. She has a small son and has only just applied for housing benefit. But it's not backdated, she will lose their home. But if it is not backdated, she will lose their home. Looking at her obvious illness, how could a job center have refused her disability pay? The kindly judge that day adjourned most cases to let shelter sort out benefit claims and debts. Without that, none would have saved their homes, and some may still lose them. The process is cruel. As evictions rise, councils insist tenants stay until bailiffs throw them onto the street to prove they are genuinely homeless. Failing to claim, along with benefit delays and errors, lay at the heart of almost every case that day. That's usual, says the solicitor. These are not scroungers, not the ones television's Benefit Street, remember I mentioned it earlier, seeks out, but those who fall into debt through not claiming, out of ignorance or pride. 0 hours and self employment leave many vulnerable to debt. Universal credit, slowly rolling out now, was supposed to make benefits rise and fall automatically with fluctuating incomes, but it has made tenants less secure. So far, 89% of those on universal credit have fallen into arrears. Their rent no longer paid direct to landlords. All this is a direct and deliberate result of government policy. The housing crisis they inherited has worsened as rents rise, but David Cameron and George Osborne's cuts to social housing are a bizarre response. The housing and planning bill going through parliament marks the end of social housing, not by accident but by deliberate policy. 88,000 council homes to rent will be lost, says the conservative controlled Local Government Association. Labour says the total will be 100. and 80,000 by 2020. Money is sucked out. Money is sucked out of social housing into treasury as the 1% rent card saves on money is sucked out of social housing into the treasury as the 1% rent card saves on the housing benefit bill by stealing funds due to pay for new social homes. Half of all renters get some housing benefit. With continuous rise in rents, cutting that support simply propels more into homelessness. Most of the proceeds of the right to buy are taken back by the Treasury. So social landlords cannot replace sold homes, and council have to sell off their best properties to help to fill the gap. New pay to stay market rents imposed on council households earning over 30,000 to 40,000 pounds in London will cause more evictions. The social effect is segregated neighborhoods. As London schools see a fall in children on free meals, with families driven out, a quarter of homeless families are rehoused far away, uprooting children from schools over and over. So this is not Ministers are right to worry that home ownership has fallen to its lowest in 3 decades, but not right to subsidize ownership at the expense of rest. However, politically, home owners are their people. Look after them and you can forget the rest. Their pollsters advise, but this will be a permanent market for their sheer social recklessness, and it may yet be their undoing. Now, that is all. I mean, Polito NB has praised shelter, and Polito NB has praised the judge. Absolute opposite of the truth that happens in courts and in that particular court. So these people are unnamed. They are not described. She didn't describe the ethnicity or race of the women that she actually listed there or the mother. Essentially, these people are of mixed backgrounds, but essentially the court, when she says it was a nice judge, she severely oversimplifies the difference between judges. Most of the judges in the county court in Shoreditch, in Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court, most of the judges sitting there are criminals. One judge, Judith Goodman, is a particularly nasty criminal. And I shall be giving the whole details about the nasty Judith Goodman in another edition. That is the court she sits in. She is a deputy district judge, and this criminal, Judith Goodman, openly and brazenly broke the law. And she was not challenged by the so called barrister representing a so called client whose rights Judith Goodman was violating brazenly on that occasion. Neither the barrister nor the so called solicitor. And so, therefore, it's a case that entails a long number of facts, and it will take longer than the time that are normally available in these editions. Now, how long has it been this time, this particular edition of the Khoodeelaar television channel? It's 1 hour, 40 minutes so far, and the time is now 20. 13 British Standard Time, which is 1913 GMT. So we shall devote another edition or more than one edition to diagnosing and dissecting the behavior of Judith Goodman, the racist, lying, law-breaking criminal, sitting as the deputy district judge on a date in 2011. Judith Goodman has caused damages and losses that exceed several million pounds. And if the role played by the barrister and the solicitor present on that occasion, if their role is added and included, then the losses and the damages would exceed several £100 million. That is not something that can be guessed from the piece, the language, or the imagery that Polly Toynbee has used in her piece of the 2nd of February 2016 on The Guardian. Judith Goodman was part of a gang of county court judges that conspired to lie. And what Polly Toynbee doesn't do is to touch on how judges abuse their position in the courts and how the rest of the bureaucracy in the courts operates against the innocent and against the people. And what the when she talks about arrears, she doesn't explain the various stages involved in the imposition of arrears. For example, in Tower Hamlets, the benefits, housing benefits person, that is the employee who is the main one in the department that allocates benefits to tenants, called Steve Hill. Now, Steve Hill is another criminal. Now, the damages that Steve Hill has caused would exceed several hundred millions. Steve Hill is also the one that authorized the prosecution of a number of councillors in Tower Hamlets over so-called housing fraud. And some of those councillors were actually sent to prison. Now, what about the opposite of the convicted councillors convicted of crimes of housing fraud? What about innocent people being framed by Steve Hill and innocent people being lumbered with rent arrears, intentionally created rent arrears, nothing to do with any lack of payments of rent by the tenants concerned, but rent arrears created against their names, their accounts, by Steve Hill lying. So Steve Hill lied, but he's not the only one who lied. The entire housing benefit section in Tower Hamlets Council, as well as in other councils in London, let's say, the housing benefit sections that allocate housing benefits entitlements decide on which tenant making the application is entitled housing benefit. Those employees, they operate on the assumption that every applicant for housing benefit, every tenant for housing benefit is a fraudster. Now look at this from the real standpoint. If the applicant, the majority of the applicants are really fraudsters, how difficult would it be to establish their true location, that true housing position. Surely, if there were fraudsters on this particular, let's say, application under consideration, then the true housing details would be available where they are truly resident and they are not entitled to housing benefit. Where are they? Because these are not fraudsters, these are genuine people, and the people have no other place, and this is the source which they must have in order to be able to pay the rent, in order for them to be able to stay on a rental basis at the property. A few months after the 2018 council and mayor election in Newham, the man called the United Nations rapporteur or investigator on poverty and housing is an Australian dressed as an academic lawyer in the University of New York. He visited the UK. And according to the report published of his visit to Newham in the Independent, bylined to a woman called, what's her name? I'll find the name of that woman and I'll find the article. According to that report, a meeting took place in the Canning Town area, Barking Road in Newham. And at the meeting, where this United Nations man was present, a woman who had been in contact with the Newham Council, a woman, I think, of African origin, she spoke. And after she spoke, Roxana Fiaz, who had just been elected mayor of Newham in the May 2018 election, stood up and performed a routine saying that she apologized to the parent, to the mother, single mother, and she was ashamed of the Newham Council behaving that way cruelly towards a mother like that. Now, let's see if I can find the article on the Independent and see the name of the particular reporter, because that particular reporter is part of the Fleet Street kind of lying for the DWP, for the local councils. But she, this reporter, pretends to be like Politonby, not quite like Politonby, but kind of an updated version of Politonby. She thinks she is, but she is not. All right, this is the piece. I've located the piece, but let's see the website, if the Independent website comes up. Okay, this is the one. This is the item. The headline is Mother describes being forced to drink her baby's milk. Hello? Who is that? Hold on. The microphone is on, so don't say anything. You coming back?
Yeah, milk.
Hold on.
Oh, glass is not there.
So, this headline on the Independent of it's a article in published in November. This is a piece, to say it again, this is a piece that is accessible on the independent.co.uk website. And its heading is Mother describes being forced to drink her baby's milk. As people living with poverty come forward to tell UN envoy their stories. I was in my slippers. It was so cold. I plucked up the courage to ask them, to say I am hungry. I have a baby. But they said, we can't give you anything. I had to drink my baby's milk. Now, this is the woman whose name is Mae Bullman. And I'll come to that name Bullman later during the process of commenting on this whole piece. So, Mae Bullman is described as the social affairs correspondent, and it's dated the 13th of November 2018. This piece, the body of this piece, has the picture of Ruxana Field speaking. And there is a video screen which reads community links. And behind Ruxana Fias is the United Nations envoy, this totally stupid racist from Australia. The fucker is over promoted on the records as a professor, distinguished law professor from Australia. Fuck off. And I'll give the reasons why he is a complete fucker. Now, people suffering extreme levels of deprivation in London have told the United Nations poverty envoy, he is not such envoy, how government-inflicted austerity has left them homeless, hungry, and at times forced into exploitation. Now, the fucking Mae Bullman is a shit of a journalist. Because it's not government-inflicted austerity, you fucking cunt. It's a Labour Party-controlled council-inflicted dehumanization. This is cunt. Because communications from our campaign sent to the Independent asking for details of the meeting were ignored by Mae Bullman, as were the communications we sent to Philip Alston, the racist cunt from Australia, based in New York. He has got an associate called Bullman as well. Now, we sent more than 100 pages. We sent more than 100 pages of evidence and analysis to Philip Alston after his visit to the UK in 2018. And Alston did not reply, nor did Alston's Arabic named moron associate at the University of New York. Now, when Alston then visited other parts of Europe, he did the same thing. What he did was he visited some particular city in Spain, other countries in Europe, and he held meetings like the one in Canning Town in Newham. And he appeared to be listening to people like this single mother. But what happened as a result of his hearing all this evidence and expressing his bogus appearance of a sage, concern about the unheard of and unspeakable poverty and deprivation and destitution. He completely, the moron Alston, completely ignored the evidence that it's not a party political thing. That poverty individually, in the context of Newham, is created by the local council. And Newham has not been a conservative council for fuck's sake, forever. Newham, as a council, when it was created in 1965, since 1965 has remained continuously a Labour-controlled council. So, what is the explanation for thousands of people being permanently on the deprivation list in Newham? It's not about government cuts, you fuckers. Government cuts have been across all the councils, Labour and Tory. The attitude of the individual decision makers employed by the Newham Council is at the center of this individual hardship. This mother who says that she was told that they couldn't give her any help. These are the items of evidence that need to be followed by prosecuting these people. But they're never prosecuted. And what the shameless criminal Rukhsana Fiaz keeps doing is absolutely shameless. There is no shame. So when you have an example of like the Boris Johnson, shameless, I mean, you cannot condemn anybody else for being shameless. That is the whole problem. And you can't even call Lies Truss shameless. I mean, these words have no meaning. They lost all meaning, which is what is the definition of an evil state, a dark state. Rukhsana Fiaz is described by the likes of the racist patrons like Dave Hill, formerly of The Guardian, and Paul Waugh of the Huffington fucking Post. I mean, they promote her. And variously, these morons and their likes say that Rukhsana Fiaz is a Muslim woman. Fuck them. She is not a Muslim mayor. She has nothing Muslim about fucking her personality. She is a liar. She's a faker. And she's a colluder with a gang of 4 criminals that had been conspiring for several years before they decided to put Rukhsana Fiaz as their choice to succeed Robin Wales. Rukhsana Fiaz had nothing to do with Islam or Muslim. Islam is against lying. And a thief is supposed to be punished with their hand being cut or hands being cut. There is no Islam in lying. So what we shall be doing, because it is more than 2 hours, we shall be continuing this theme in the next part.